Roasting is a core fundamental of cooking because you can literally roast anything. You are developing flavor by browning. Roasting is all about control of time and temperature in your oven. I'm going to show you how there are essentially two main methods of roasting. One, which is high heat and short amount of time, and the other, which is lower heat and a longer amount of time. My favorite thing about roasting, however, is the cleanup is usually very minimal. And also it's kind of a hands-off dish. With just a short amount of prep up front, I get to put something in the oven, walk away, and then come back and dinner is ready. I'm gonna show you an example of a high heat and short time roasting method by quartering and roasting some of these potatoes. The goal with roasting is to maximize the Maillard reaction that happens on the outside of whatever it is that you're roasting. Maillard reaction is a fancy term for browning. That color is what brings flavor to your final dish. Potatoes and pretty much all vegetables fall in the high heat, short amount of time. Other things in this category would include, all types of chicken, sausage, quick cooking cuts of meat, fish, seafood, all of those things, and pretty much every vegetable fits in the category of high heat and short time. When I'm roasting at, a high heat for a short amount of time, 450 degrees is my go-to oven temperature. If I have a convection setting, I will set my oven for 425. And the reason for that is because what a convection setting does is it means that there is a fan that is constantly operating in your oven while you're cooking. The disbursement of the heat makes the oven act like it's cooking at a higher temperature. I have a convection setting, so I'm gonna set it at 425, but if you don't have a convection setting, it will turn out just as good at 450 degrees. While your oven is preheating, you want to prepare your pan and the ingredients. I have a sheet tray here. As you can tell by what my sheet tray looks like, I roast a lot. I do want to figure out a way how to not have my ingredients stick to the pan, particularly when you're talking vegetables like potatoes, which have a lot of starch and are inherently sticky. There are two ways to achieve that. One of them is to actually put your pan in the oven right as you turn your oven on to preheat and let your pan come up to 450 or 425 in the oven as your oven temperature rises. And then you would just put, your cut up potatoes with oil, directly on the hot pan when the oven was preheated. That's essentially the same technique as searing, and that's why it works, and that's why it keeps the potatoes from sticking. But the all-time easiest way to prevent your food from sticking when you're roasting is the magic of parchment paper. Whoever invented the sheet of baking parchment paper, I love them. It makes life very easy and it makes cleanup faster. When I roast potatoes or carrots or something like that, I hardly ever peel them. There is something special when that skin gets kind of crispy and brown and the inside is so tender and soft. I love that. My favorite way to cook roast potatoes is to cut them into quarters. Cutting the potatoes is going to give me more surfaces that have the potential to brown. Now, before I put my potatoes on the sheet tray, I'm gonna toss them with a little bit of oil and salt. I'm using a high heat oil, which means that it has a high smoke point. The smoke point is the temperature at which oil will start to smoke. So if I have my oven at 450 or 425, I want to make sure I'm picking an oil with a smoke point that is higher than my oven temperature. That way I'm not, burning the oil while I'm roasting. I have some grapeseed oil. Seasoning the potatoes with a good amount of salt, because salt is gonna bring out that delicious flavor, and a little bit of black pepper. Now let's transfer them to the pan. Roasting is about hot air enveloping every single little piece of potato on this tray. So they need space, and you wanna make sure that you're not overcrowding them. This is like really, part of the art of the sheet pan dinner. You wanna make sure that you're giving everything space to breathe, for the roasting of your oven to do what it's supposed to do. I'm also turning all of the potatoes on their kind of flat side. This is the part that's gonna brown and get really delicious and golden brown and crispy. My potatoes are cut, they're seasoned, oiled, they're spaced well on this sheet tray, and it's time to put them in the oven. I'm gonna set the timer for about 20 minutes. They could take anywhere from 20 to 35 minutes, depending on how big your potato pieces are. And I definitely wanna come back and toss them a couple of times to make sure they brown evenly. But for now, it's time to wait. In front of me, I have a nice big, like 5.5-pound hunk of pork shoulder. This cut is a tough cut of meat, right? And that's how I know that it's gonna need to be for a long period of time at a low temperature. It's also enormous. It's a very large piece of meat. And it's both, the size, but the type that are helping me determine how I'm gonna cook this. When you're trying to decide whether a cut of meat is going to be tender or tough, it's helpful to just think about anatomy for a minute. When I move around in the world, the parts of me that get the most work are my shoulders. I hold all of my tension and anxiety right here. And then also my legs. I am on my feet in the restaurants, at work, running around, chasing my children, like all day on my legs. So it's the same thing when it comes to meat, right? Like things that come from shoulders or the leg, all of those are going to be tougher cuts and need more time for the proteins to start to break down to tenderize them. Other similar cuts like this would be brisket or leg of lamb. If a muscle gets more work, it's going to need more time roasting. A great low temperature, slow cooking range is about 250 degrees to 280. If you're cooking at 250 to 280, it's about 90 minutes per pound of meat. So for this piece of pork shoulder, it's 5.5 pounds. So if I multiply that by 90 minutes, I'm looking at cooking it for about 8 hours. You actually want to get that internal temperature all the way up to 195 to 205. That's the point at which the proteins inside have started breaking apart. That means that when I take a fork to it, when it's done, it's just going to fall apart and then it will melt in my mouth. I'm gonna preheat my oven. I'm gonna set it at 280 degrees, just on regular bake. Before I roast this pork shoulder, I'm going to score the skin and season it with salt. The reason I'm doing that is because it's gonna like open the skin up to the fat underneath, and it'll allow the heat as I'm roasting to reach that fat easier and render it into the rest of the pan and piece of meat. I don't want to score all the way down to the meat. I just want to leave like a cut through the skin and into the fat. So do a few cuts this way and then come back the other direction and do a few cuts this way. I'm going to season the pork shoulder with a lot of salt. It tends to make meat juicier, not only taste better, but like have a better mouthfeel. And I'm gonna season it on all sides. I'm adding some pepper, and that's it. This took a matter of moments to score the fat, season the meat, and now we can let the oven do all the work. I want you to see this right here. This is roasting. See how beautiful and brown and bubbled up those surfaces are? And then look at how soft, tender, creamy the inside is. This is magic right here. And I didn't do anything but put a little bit of salt, some pepper, some oil. My oven did all of this. I don't think that there is anything better than roasted potatoes. I mean, maybe carrots. Starches tend to do this amazing, incredible thing, that creamy inside and that crispy brown outside. Well, I take that back. Pork shoulder might be right up there. Look here, look what happened when we roasted this for 8 hours at 280 degrees. It created on the outside, look at that, this really like kind of hard, crispy, deep brown, candy-like exterior. This right here is a perfect example of the Maillard reaction. The change of the protein when it browns and turns into something entirely new. It's crunchy and well seasoned and super flavorful. Both of these were prepared using different methods for roasting. The potatoes were high temp for a very short period of time, 30 minutes. The pork shoulder was cooked at a low temperature for a really long period of time, 8 hours. But the end result of these two things, what we are looking at, the brown, crispy exterior and the soft, tender, melt in your mouth interior, that is what roasting is all about. And the best part about roasting is that it takes no time to set up on the front end, a couple of minutes to toss some salt and maybe a little oil or pepper, put it in the oven, and you let your oven do the work. And then when it comes to cleanup, you've got one pan or a piece of parchment paper. It's one of my favorite ways to cook at home. You can roast literally anything. And now that you know 2 different techniques and how to choose which technique to use, you can begin roasting at home as much as I do.